Now, would you consider yourself somewhat of a conforming chameleon? You know, many of us are, and yet nobody wants to admit that they may be a conformist. And there should be no shame in admitting that you're one. In fact, I was one for so many years during my career, until the day that I decided that I wanted to show my true colors and be my authentic self. So here are 5 telltale signs that you may also be a conforming chameleon like I was, and you may need to change as well. So number 1 is the lizard brain. This is the most primitive part of our limbic system that wants us to avoid potential dangers. It's usually what kicks in when we are presented with a new challenge or a new obstacle or a new opportunity. It infuses our mind with fear to make sure that we're safe and that we know what we're getting into, and usually that resistance keeps us from doing things. But for me, my reptilian brain had a little bit of a different effect. I was concerned with not fitting in. Many of us are. In fact, some would say that our society is obsessed with fitting in. And so my concern with not fitting in caused me to not really evaluate the jobs that I was accepting or the teams that I was joining. I just somewhat by default wanted to fit in so bad that I just conformed and then evaluate that fit. Even Brené Brown says that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And you don't really want to fit in, you want to belong. And that is an item right there that you can use for reflection. Number 2, blind allegiance. So would you say that you're losing sight of your values? When's the last time you verified to make sure that your employer's priorities reflected your own? So when I started my career, I created a blueprint for the direction I wanted my career to head in. And many of us do this, and we take on jobs that are exciting and motivating and that challenge us, which is a great thing because that means you're in a good place. But at some point, you slip into autopilot mode and you stop checking in with yourself. You stop verifying to make sure that you're still headed in the direction that you wanted to head in, or that you're creating the body of work that you expected to create. And so if you're not doing this, it's okay. A lot of people are in that same position. I recommend that you start to reflect and figure out why it is that you're off track, and maybe consider the changes that you need to make in order to get back on track. Think about it. Now, I think that that kind of reflection is crucial to anybody's career. And in fact, it should be occurring on a regular basis. And for years, I avoided that kind of reflection. And I think I spent my time trying to convince myself that my employer's path and my path were aligned, when in fact, in many cases, they weren't. And why is this important? You want to make sure that you're striving to achieve your goals and not somebody else's. And if your employer's goals and your goals are completely and perfectly aligned, that's fantastic. You have nothing to worry about. You're not a conformist, but often it's not the case. Now, one of the most difficult things that I experienced as a conforming chameleon was internalizing my emotions. That's why number 3 is called turning blue in the face. So sometimes we're afraid to express our opinions, our thoughts, our ideas, our concerns, because we don't want to ruffle feathers, or we kind of have an idea of how those ideas are going to be perceived by others. And that means you're not being your authentic self. And if you're not able to be you in your workplace environment, then I think that is a very dangerous thing, because we tend as conforming chameleons to be able to appear very calm, cool, and collected on the outside. But meanwhile, on the inside, we've got this storm brewing, and eventually we need to find an outlet to release that negative energy. And I wouldn't want to be in your presence when you find your outlet, and I definitely don't want to be the person unleashing all of those negative emotions onto others. So you're gonna have to figure out how you can start to show your true colors, and maybe it's not the right environment for you, or maybe it's just a few conversations that need to take place. Would you say that you are obsessed with what the critics think? You know, there are two kinds of critics. That's four. There are two kinds of critics. There are critics that tell us exactly what we want to hear, and there are the critics that tell us the things that we don't like hearing so much. They're both dangerous, because when the critics who tell us the things we love hearing give us great feedback, it makes us happy, and we don't always push ourselves further than we have to. We made everybody happy, and we feel great. But then, on the flip side, when we hear negative feedback from some people, then we are miserable, and then we become increasingly paranoid about what those people will think. If you're doing this, you're not being authentic. You're not being you, and this is dangerous, particularly with the creative process. I have found that when I'm paranoid about what people will think of my ideas and my projects, then it stifles my work process. So you don't want to be in a position where you're somebody else's puppet. Be yourself and stop worrying about the critics. Now, there's also another type of critic that I should mention. This is a very powerful critic for me. It always has been. It's the inner critic. It's that critic that tells us that we're not good enough. Now, you'll notice that often this critic is a projection of what we think or fear that other people will think. Another critic that we need to silence as conforming chameleons. Now, sometimes we're at a job and we feel like we're captives. So there's captivity, but then there's also comfort in captivity. So this is the strange thing. I meet people all the time who tell me, listen, I really don't like my job. I've outgrown it. It's no longer for me. I can't stand the people I work with. I don't like the kind of work that I'm doing. There's millions of reasons why you might not be happy with the kind of work that you're doing. And they always say, I'm going to get out. I'm going to get out of here. Soon I'm going to start looking for something. And it's strange because often these people stay at this job for much longer than they need to. Now, I myself did the exact same thing. I used to fantasize about escaping my aquarium, leaping out of my comfort zone. I knew I was in a comfort zone. I knew I needed to get out, but yet something kept me there. And I think this can be attributed to the comfort that comes with having a blueprint of your comfort zone. You know what to expect day in and day out. You know the good, you know the bad, and so you don't know what's out there. And so you can fantasize about it, but you kind of still stick around and are just imagining this scenario where someday you will be free. This can take years to figure out. The scariest thing about a comfort zone is not realizing that you're in one. And conforming chameleons, they like their aquarium. They like knowing what they're up against every day. And for years, that's what I did. And what I will say is this. The day that I finally decided that enough was enough, that I was going to escape my comfort zone, is the day that I feel that I grew myself a set of wings. And I never looked back. I shed my skin and I felt great. And I have never looked back and felt like that was a mistake, because I believe I was being true to myself and what I really needed. Think about it.